Hi, welcome to the Crafts channel. My name is Corinne Brad and I've got another lovely quilt project for you. So if you like sewing, you'll love this. It's this great flower design that you can do on a quilt. I can't open this up in its entirety because it's too big. But as you can see, that mix of colours with that nice big bold flower design in the centre is a great project. And if you want to improve your quilting skills, it's a nice project to get started on because you're making points. You're not just sewing plain squares onto more plain squares, you're actually forming these points here and here. So let's just pop that over there a second. To start with, I'll bring it back because I actually need to show you this. For each block you will need 4 squares of a background colour, 4 squares of a petal colour, and 1 square of a centre colour. And then you will need 4 half square triangles of a petal and 8 half square triangles of a background. And I'll show you how we sew them together. Because when you're sewing a half square triangle onto a square, you need to allow the extra 4 seam allowances. So it's not just a simple matter of you get a 10-inch square, you get a 5-inch triangle, you sew it on, because everything will come up small. So for your centrepiece, we've got here an 11 centimetre square of fabric, so it will come down to 10 centimetres or 4 inches when you've taken the seam allowance off each side. And then the half square triangles that I've made up have actually been made from 6.5 centimetre squares, so that not only do you lose the seam allowance on this inside, but you also lose them on the edges. So you just need to be aware of the fact that you're better off cutting things 0.5 centimetre or, you know, an 1/8 of an inch bigger than you normally would to allow for this. Now, I like these designs. A lot of people do these designs and their measuring is so accurate. You think, how on earth have you done that? I've found the easiest way of doing this is if you can get yourself a seam roller, and I've got no idea where I got this seam roller from, but it's really handy. If you fold your 11 centimetre square of fabric and just finger press or roll press the centre, and do the same in the other way to make a cross, and then take each point of the square, bring it up to the middle and press that diagonal line. Now that's the other reason this thing is so good, because if you try and finger press a diagonal, because you'll be working on the bias, you do risk stretching the fabric as you're doing it, so you might not get a perfectly straight line. But because this works like a wallpaper seam roller, that kind of thing, you're pressing down on it without actually moving it or moving the fabric. So you've now got your nicely pressed creases, and what you're going to do is each triangle is going to go on the edge there, so you need to put it face down and line up that seam edge with your crease and then sew it 5mm in from there. And you'll think, well, hold on a minute, then that's not going to be a perfect, it's not going to line up perfectly. You don't want it to come out dead on the edges because you need your seam allowance still on the edges. You don't need to pin it, just simply bring it to your machine, straight stitch, 2mm long, and I'm not even going to bother locking the stitch on this because it's not a load bearing seam. And when you fold it back, you'll find that, I don't know if you can see that here, but where your centre line is here, the edges of your fabric overlap that centre line, and that's what you want. I'm just going to hold this in place, I'm going to top stitch this line. And you could do this, if you do it, perhaps do it with a complementary thread. Don't just do it in white. And then take your next one and again line it up to that fold line. So you line up your seam allowance to the fold line. And then simply sew down it about 5mm in. Whoop. Press it out. And top stitch it. And then as you can see, you've got an excess, so that point doesn't join at the edge. You've got about 3-4 mil here, and that's great because that's your seam allowance. When you come to stitch these pieces together, you'll line it up perfectly to that, and then your point will be exactly on the seam. So I'm just going to sew these last pieces to it to make the central block in exactly the same way. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Don't forget, when you're sewing them on there, you need to sew it right sides together. So I'm just going to pull that stitching out. And this is a great thing about actually not putting a locking stitch on the edge of it. It does mean I've got no difficult bits to try and unpick. Right, face down would help. Still, it wouldn't be one of our videos if I didn't make a mistake in the middle of it, would it? So that's just my thread is caught up in the back there. So there, you've sewn your central block, and if you flip it over, you'll see there is a little bit of give here and there. It's really not that important because you've got enough seam allowance that any discrepancies can be covered up when you sew the pieces together. So I'm just going to trim off all these loose ends. And pop them in the bin. So there's your central block. Now with the edges, or the petals, you make it more or less the same way, but you just need 2 of these triangles. So again, it's an 11cm square. I'm just going to press it in half and press it into quarters. And then I'm going to sew the petals to the 2 areas that have got less print on them. So 1, 2. And again, line your diagonal edge of your 6.5cm square, half square triangle, if that makes sense. And stitch. Fold it back and top stitch. You don't have to top stitch this. The reason I'm doing this is because I need it to lay flat for the demonstration. If you didn't want to top stitch it, you could simply just press it. But I've got enough equipment on this table at the minute without getting the iron out as well. Lay that down like so. And as I say, I haven't bothered locking any of these stitches because none of these seams are actually going to be stressed on, because they are just decoration applique seams, if you like, rather than being a seam that joins it together. So that's one petal. I'm just going to show you that petal again. So fold in half. There you go. So you have 2 petals for either side of your central square. So join these together in a strip of 3. And what I'd suggest you do is, if you can see slightly you've got a difference in fabrics between here and here and here and here, use your 11 centimetre base square as your guide and line it up to the 11 centimetre base square of the petal. And then when we sew it, this inner seam line is where the point of your fabric will be. So you want to make sure that your seam goes right through the middle of that point. I will lock it this time. So when you open it up, if you were to finger press that seam out, you can see, I don't know if you can see so well on the camera because it's green, but you can see the point of that rests right on the seam line. And that's what you want for a nice neat finish. This is one of the easiest methods to start practicing lining up points for a perfect looking quilt. Now, I'm anything but perfect. You know, if it's out by a couple of millimetres, by the time it's seen from a distance, I don't think anybody notices. But there are some, you know, very particular quilters out there. And, you know, especially if if you're proud of the work that you do and you want it to look good from any angle. And it isn't that difficult to line up a seam like this. So there you go, you've got your centre panel. I've got 2 more petals that I've created earlier that go here and here, and 2 more background pieces. Now when you sew your background pieces together, you haven't got to be anywhere near as fussy lining it up, because you've only got, you haven't actually got a point, you've just got a diagonal. So we will very quickly sew these. So that's the bottom of your square. There you go. Nice and quick. And then you simply sew together along these long seams. What I would recommend you do is, again, take a bit of care, because you've got central seam lines here, which would be nice if you could match them up properly. So I suggest you open it like that so you can see where the seams are, and then pin on a seam there. Do the same for this seam. Now if you're a bit slapdash with your seam allowances like me, you may then well find that one piece of fabric seems a bit baggier than the other, but cotton's got a certain degree of stretch in it. You can just hold it taut as you're running it through the machine, and then when it shrinks up, it will shrink up evenly, and it will be imperceptible that one bit was bigger than the other. and then again as you're sewing it, with your central square where you can see the diagonal lines were, just make sure you run through the middle of it. So that's one. Very quickly do the other one. Again, line up your seams. And there you go. Nice, easy patchwork block. And then before you sew it together, you might just want to take a quilter's rule and a rotary cutter. You can't really see very easily because it's red on red. And just straighten up those seams where you've had slight discrepancies. And you can either sew the blocks together as they are. What I like to do though is run a length of sashing between each block, because especially where you've got the points of your petals, you've got about 6 layers of fabric. You try and sew 2 points together, you've got 12 layers of fabric, so you're better off just putting a sash there. So that is all we have time for today. Again, flower block, hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. If you've been inspired to create, please share your makes with us in the comments section below. And if you've enjoyed videos by the Crafts channel, hit the like button. Want to see more of us? Then click subscribe. See you next time.